Hi, I'm Leo from Board Game Gateway, and today we're going to deep dive into some of the really great game mechanics of White Castle. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the game, and then we'll deep dive into the three best game design decisions, in my opinion, that make this game super unique and super fun to play. So let's get into it. The White Castle is essentially a worker placement game. One twist on that is that you won't be getting your workers back once you've placed them on the board. So they permanently stay there, and that is how you get victory points in this game. So players will basically take turns picking a dice from one of these three dice bridges. So we have the orange dice, the black dice, and the white dice. You'll be able to take one dice from either extreme of the bridge and then place it somewhere on the board and take the relevant action. There are three zones on the board where you can send your workers, which also correspond to the three types of workers that you have in your personal board. So those three types of workers are the warrior, the farmer, or the gardener, and we also have the courtier. So each of these worker types can only go into their appropriate sections on the game board. So a warrior can only go to the training grounds. We have the gardener. The gardener can only go to the garden section on the left of the board. And the courtier can only go to what is potentially the most influential area on the board, also happens to be the biggest in the middle here, which is the White Castle. Now, I'm not going to delve into the full set of rules or do a how to play video here. You can look into our channel for a future video on that. But what I want to get into are my favorite three design decisions that I believe make this game so unique and so much fun to play. So let's get into that. The first one that I want to talk about is the dice mechanic. So the dice mechanic is really interesting in this game. At the start of the round, you roll the number of dice equal to 1 plus the number of players in the game. So for each color dice, we would roll 3 if we were playing a 2-player game. We roll the 3 dice, and then you place the lowest dice on the left-hand side of the bridge, the highest number dice on the right-hand side of the bridge, and everything else goes in ascending order in the middle of the bridge. So what's interesting here is that they've basically taken a pretty common mechanic, which is roll some dice, see what you get, and that affects what actions you can take. But the twist here is the constraint from the bridge, because at this point, players can only take a dice from either extreme end of the bridge. So if it's my turn, I can either choose to take the 1 in the orange dice, or I can take the 4. I'm not allowed to touch the 3. The other reason this is interesting is because if you look at the board, the dice spaces where you put your dice also have numbers on them. And depending on the difference between the number of the dice that I choose to place and the number on the board, I either have to pay money or I gain money. So if I was to take this orange 4 dice, and if I was to place it on, for example, this 3 space here, because 4 is bigger than 3 by 1, I would actually gain $1 here. Now, if instead I chose to take the 1 and place it on that same space, the 3, because 1 is less than 3 by 2 points, I would actually have to pay $2 to be able to take that action. So already we've got a tension as to should I pick the larger dice or should I pick the lower dice? Now you may be asking, why on earth would anyone pick the lower value dice if it means you will usually lose money? Now, there's a couple of things, again, that are quite clever in the game design that will offset this, right? So if you were to take the lower value dice on the left of the bridge, you'll notice that there is a lantern symbol. And that lantern symbol means you get a really, really cool bonus that relates to your personal area. So I'm going to touch on that in the next game design point. So there is a reason why you would want to take the lower value dice. The other reason, quite simply, is because the higher value dice might have already been taken. So at some point, there may only be 1 dice left, and maybe that's all the options that I have. But the lantern bonus is a really big reason as to why you would also choose to take the lower value dice. The other thing that's really cool about the dice mechanics is that if you're playing a 3 or 4 player game, let's say that someone has already taken an action using this 4 dice here. If I then wanted to take the same action, I actually can by stacking another dice on top of that one, right? So I could take this 4 value dice and I could place it on top of that one. And the same rules apply where you look at the difference between the dice values as to whether you pay money or gain money for occupying that space. Now, anybody that knows me knows that I do like a good dice mechanic, so I really appreciate the way that they've put a unique twist on the dice mechanics in this game, and I really do think that it makes for a very dynamic and interesting decision space as to which dice you take and where you place them for maximum benefit. So that is the first game design decision that I really like about this game. Now, the second game design decision that I really want to talk about is the personal board. What I like about the personal board is that it adds a little bit more flexibility as to what you can do during the game. So if you find that the main board becomes too crowded and the thing that you're trying to do isn't available on that board, you can always look to your personal board because there are more options there. So for example, you can see that on your personal board, you have 3 different rows with dice symbols, and you can place a dice during your turn on your personal board, as long as the color matches, and then you can take the action across that row where your workers are. For example, if I was to take this 6 white dice, I could place that on my 6 space here. Because the numbers are the same, I don't lose money and I don't gain money either. And then I would look across this row, I would get whatever benefits are uncovered. So this depends on how many workers you've placed during the game. So if I had, for example, already placed 2 of my warriors in the training grounds, then you can see that I've uncovered 3 mother of pearl resources that I can gain by activating this dice. And then on top of that, if you follow this through to the right-hand side, you'll also be able to trigger whatever is on this space. So this particular action allows me to take a warrior and place them into the training grounds. So then I could then take that action and place a warrior. Essentially, I've gained 3 resources and been able to take a specific action on the main board, all by using a dice on my personal space. So if the board is feeling cluttered, it just gives you more things to do and more options during the game. And the other cool thing is that your personal board will evolve over time as you uncover more spaces from your workers and as you add more of these cards, which you get by taking the bonus actions in the White Castle. Now let's talk about the third and probably my favorite game design decision from the White Castle. Earlier I mentioned that taking one of the lower value dice from the dice bridge will also trigger the lantern bonus. So let's talk about what it is. The lantern bonus is actually just triggering what's in your personal space, indicated by the lantern symbol and the little arrow pointing to the right. Now, when you start the game, you may start with very little in that lantern space. So most people will start with 1 card, maybe 2, depending on which starting pair they've chosen. In this example here, the yellow player has a fan, which is a victory point, and a rice bowl, which is a resource type. So what that means is, let's say that it's my turn. I could choose to take the 1 value orange dice and place it somewhere. If I place it on this 3 space here, as before, I would have to pay $2. But not only can I then trigger the orange action on that space, which gets me 2 anvil resources, but I would also then trigger my lantern because of that icon there, right? So any lower value dice will trigger that lantern bonus, which means that not only would I then get the 2 anvil resource, but I would also get a victory point and a rice bowl. Now, that might not seem all that impressive, but imagine that this is early in the game and I'm getting 2 things from the lantern. Later in the game, you might end up adding a lot more cards into that lantern bonus, right? Because every card that you take from the White Castle, when you move your courtier up, is going to then land in this space here, and the card that it's replacing in your personal space will then be flipped over and added to your lantern bonus. So the next time I trigger this lantern bonus, I would then be getting a victory point, a rice bowl, and be able to move my heron 1 space to the right, which is just another victory point gaining mechanism in the game. So what you can see here is that the lantern bonus is a really clever design mechanic that is solving a few different problems in the game. It's giving you a reason to take the lower value dice. It's something that evolves throughout the game that you can keep adding to and making that even more and more powerful. And then it allows you to then have lots of interesting combinations that happen, right? So you could take a dice that triggers the lantern bonus, that gives you all of these different things that might then trigger something else to happen. So it makes for a really exciting mid and end game when you're playing the White Castle, and just gives you again more of that strategic flexibility. So overall, those were the three game design mechanics that I really appreciated from the White Castle. To summarize, I really liked the dice and the way that they're constrained on these bridges so that you can only take from the extremes. And then the way that they're placed on the board, the way that it either gives you money or forces you to pay money to use that action. And then the way that they can also stack in 3 or 4 player games, I thought was quite clever. The second mechanic that we talked about was the personal space and how it gives you more of that optionality by giving you more ways to take actions and potentially gain resources. And then the third design decision was the lantern bonus, which gives you a reason to take those lower value dice, gives you some really cool combos and benefits, and is something that evolves during the course of the game. So it becomes more and more powerful and is essentially like the engine that builds up over the game. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you've played the White Castle, I'd love to know what you think of the game. What's your favorite game design mechanic? And if you haven't played White Castle, keep an eye out for our Learn to Play and Playthrough video. And I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, Board Game Gateway, for more quality board game videos. And see you next time.